All right. So today we're piggybacking on the conversation that we had yesterday on working with buyers with regards to understanding the COVID climate in this real estate market. As we know, this real estate market is very aggressive, and it has been very aggressive all throughout COVID. There are just some differences that we're noticing now that are very much catching us up with the DC and Northern Virginia market, in that in Prince George's County, we've been able to get away with asking for closing costs for a long period of time. We've been able to get our buyers 3% closing costs on most transactions without any problems. However, in this COVID climate, we're noticing that this is very much a seller's market, I want to say on steroids, in the sense that what we're going to have to do in order to get our buyers' offers accepted is kind of what we used to have to do back in the day, and it has circled around to those times again. So we're going to go through the offer and talk about all of the different components of the offer where we're going to have to negotiate a little bit more, I would say, seller side in a sense, in order to get offers accepted. And the reason why we're going this route is because we have so many buyers that we've written offers for, and Mr. Porter, you can speak to this as well, with just within the last month or so. And so many offers that are overpriced, great offers have been shot down, and they have been won out by buyers who simply did not need closing costs, by buyers who simply did not ask for any contingencies. And the things that we know are negotiation strategies, but we often try to make the offer as best for our buyer as possible. But we're going to have to go back and re-educate our buyers and let them know what this COVID market entails, okay? We talked for months about why this is such a great time to purchase and why the real estate industry is booming in the midst of this pandemic. And that has really started to spread like wildfire, because buyers who are purchasing in the midst of this market, they are very aggressive. They are aggressive in a number of ways. So let's start talking about some of the features of our offer and what these things would entail or need to entail in order to get our buyers' offers accepted, because each of us are going to have to educate our buyers on the market, okay?
Jasmine, before you get started, let me just chime in because I'm going to let you roll. Guys, listen, I love writing offers, but not that much, especially if they're not getting accepted. And I've written 21 offers and only have had 5 accepted, and that's unusual for me. We use this template that we've been using, has been working very successfully for the past 7 years. But what I've been doing was following up with the agents who did not select us just to get feedback on what we could do to improve our offers. And the overwhelming majority of them saying that your offer was very strong and that it was overpriced or whatever, but the other offers didn't ask for closing help, or they didn't have much in terms of contingencies. They weren't even worried about inspection, etc. And so that is changing the way we're going to have to do things. So I had a meeting with Mike Cooper already and let him know that the jig is up. You know, we've been getting away with it in Maryland, primarily Prince George's County, because even in, Virginia, DC, and Baltimore, you write an offer, you ask for closing help, you can just forget it. Your offer's not even going to be entertained. But we've been getting away with it for a very long time in Prince George's County. And so I let Mike Cooper know when he starts to do pre-approvals from now on, it will behoove him to make sure that our clients that we're sending to him are more qualified even than they are now. And what that means is that they have to have money. So when we talk about credit, income, and assets, they need to have good credit. They need to have income, but listen, they have to have some assets. They have to have the money in the bank to close the deal without needing closing help from the sellers on their closing costs. So that's very important for us to start the message to buyers. Now, the good thing is that the buyers that are new to us, that have not done a buyer's consultation, we can make that message clear in the buyer's consultation. The bad thing is that there's some people who are in our pipeline who we've already had buyers consultations with that now we're going to have to go back to and have a different conversation with them to let them know how aggressive this is. And most of them probably have experienced enough offers being rejected that they kind of get that they need to do something differently. And the thing that we're going to suggest that they do differently is this: come to the table with the money. Now, back in the day, as many of you know, before FHA and all that, people used to save 20% if they wanted to buy a house. Well, they don't necessarily have to have 20% on the FHA loan, but we can't ask for that extra 3% in seller concession. So that being said, that's kind of where we are right now in terms of submitting offers. And the 5 that I was able to get accepted, those were people who had cash, who didn't really care about inspection or repairs. They were either doing themselves or were willing to pay. And they were able to bring all of their closing costs. We even had, I was telling one of the agents yesterday, we even had one of the clients who had an FHA loan who only had to bring maybe $13,000 to the table to close. He went back and said, no, I want to put down more money. So people are coming with money nowadays, okay? And the gloves are off. It's bare knuckles out here. So it used to be aggressive, now it's just violent. So we got to take our gloves off and we got to get in there and get dirty with them and let our buyers know, listen, we got to come not only strong, not only aggressive, but we got to come with everything. You know, we got to bring everything to the table so that buyers have to ante up. We have to, message it to them correctly and disclose it to them. And also with our lenders, we need to let our lenders know we need to come with stronger pre-approvals.
Excellent points, Mr. Porter. What I want to say is that as we look at this synopsis, this is what a standard offer would look like before this very aggressive COVID market that we're seeing. Let's just think about the people who are in the market right now. These are people who are financially stable, they're secure in their job positions, and they have not been impacted by the pandemic. So these people are very financially sound, and like Mr. Porter said, they're able to bring a little bit more to the table than people who may have been impacted by the pandemic. So this is what a standard offer, a synopsis page would look like before, but we're going to have to totally rearrange this. So let's just think with regards to a list price, $550,000. If this is the list price, the purchase price needs to be very different if we're looking for closing costs. Okay, so let's just consider if the purchase price is $550,000 and we're asking for 3% in closing costs, then technically we've asked that seller to give us $16,500. So I'm going to just type that there just for the sake of demonstration. So essentially what we've said to the seller is, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I want you to give me $16,500 off of the purchase price, because that's what we're asking when we're asking them to credit our buyer 3% back in closing costs. So effectively, what we're then offering that seller is very different. So that $550,000, and you take your 16, I just did that wrong, my apologies. So you're actually only offering that seller $533,500. So that is what this offer is. So I want us to look at it very soberly, because if this is the offer that we're making on behalf of our buyers, then we can see why in this COVID market this is not being accepted. So if you've offered $550,000 and you've asked for 3% back in closing costs, that seller's net is only $533,000. Okay, so if you have competing offers that have offered an even $550,000 with no closing costs, that offer just right out of the gate is $16,500 stronger than your buyers. So this is our springboard. This is what we're looking at now. If we have a buyer that needs closing costs, like Mr. Porter said, the first thing we need to do is have a conversation with Mr. Cooper to see what we can do to limit the amount of closing costs that our buyers need. A lot of buyers have retirement accounts that allow for them to pull from them to purchase a home. And sometimes people are shy to use it, but that just means that there's a point of education that has to happen. We need to let those buyers know, hey, you're simply pulling it from one investment vehicle and you're putting it into another investment vehicle. You're earning interest in your retirement account and you're also earning interest in your real estate account. So you're simply pulling it and you're moving it into different vehicles there. So if the buyers are able to pull from their retirement account in order to make that down payment, it's going to secure their offer a whole lot better. Because if we were the seller or the seller's agent looking at an offer of $533,500 on a $550,000 home, is not very attractive to the seller at all. Okay? So we've been able to get away with this in the Prince George's County market for many years, but now it has caught up with us. So we're going to have to adapt and adjust so that our buyers are winning offers in this market. So then you say, well, what does this need to look like? If your buyer is asking for $16,500, the minimum offer that you should be making at a very minimum should be putting this on top of your purchase price. And that's basic as well. And the point that Mr. Porter was making is that not even that is winning in this COVID market. Let's just take a look at what that looks like. Okay, so if that property was listed at $550,000 and your buyer needed 3% back in closing costs, the minimum offer is $565,500. Now, even with that, that puts the seller's net at the exact same thing as if a buyer offered $550,000 but didn't need closing costs. So you got to realize that this is a zero because the seller doesn't make anything more on this offer than they would with any other buyer. So this offer right here is a zero. Does that make sense to everybody? So what we want to encourage our buyers to do is to reduce closing costs at all costs and also increase the purchase price. Okay? So we're going to have conversations with the lender and with the buyer about pulling from their retirement account, getting gift funds, down payment assistance programs, whatever avenues are available so as to reduce the need for seller concession. We also can ask Mr. Cooper for lender credit. There's a way that he can structure their interest rate so that he can build in a lender credit for them so that they don't need so much closing costs from the seller. So those are conversations that we need to have in advance. All right. So in this market, I do want you guys to know that buyers for a $550,000 home, they're offering a minimum of $15,000 over list price just on average, not needing any closing costs. So let's just be aware what our competition is doing. So if we're aware of what they're doing, we know how to counter it. So some other negotiation features are the earnest money deposit. What we have been doing is having our buyers to put a minimum of 1% down in their earnest money deposit. And that still is very competitive because most buyers are only putting down $1,000 for their earnest money deposit. But in this COVID market, if we can take this up to 1.5% or even 2%, then that makes it even more attractive. Now, the reason we can do that is because this earnest money deposit is the first part of their down payment. And if they're FHA requires them to put down 3.5% anyway. And D, I saw your question with regards to what's 3.5%. Okay. Well, if their purchase price is now $565,500, and they have to do 3.5%, then that 3.5% then effectively becomes $19,792. So if we want to have them to put down simply 2% or 1.5%, we're going to have to bring this earnest money deposit up.
So a question to go back to the increasing the offer amount by the what would be the seller's concessions. So, and I'm confirming that. So what we need to also let the buyer know is, because if the house is 355, or however much it was that you said, if the house is 355 and if it doesn't appraise for that additional 15,000, they still need to be prepared to pay the difference.
So that's a very good question, and that's a two-part answer, okay? So the first thing that we're gonna do before we even start writing an offer is we're gonna do a market analysis on the property. And that market analysis is gonna tell us what the values are. Normally, you'll see low, medium to high in terms of the range. You should be able to find comps in the area that you're writing the offer for. That's the first answer. So you should be able to find comps there. Now, if you're unable to find comps, then it becomes a little bit different because, are you guys able to see me? My screen just did something weird.
Can't see now.
Okay.
Yeah, screen left.
It just did mine just did something strange and it cut out my screen sharing, but I'm gonna go right back to it.
Okay.
Okay, give me 1 second. My apologies. All right, let me go back to sharing with you guys. Can you see my screen again now?
Not yet. It's buffering. Now we can see it. Well.
Okay, perfect. Apologies, I don't know what that interruption was about. Okay, so with regards to the purchase price, with FHA, there's a such thing called an FHA amendatory clause, and we're gonna go through that after we finish with the synopsis page. We're gonna scroll down just a little bit. But whenever there's an FHA loan, there's an addendum that has to coincide with it. And that addendum includes a clause called an FHA amendatory clause. That clause is what protects our buyers from being responsible for paying more than what the property appraises for, okay? Now, one of the good things about this aggressive market is that it's gonna drive the values of properties up because you have so much stiff competition. That being said, we haven't had very many issues with appraisal. In the event that we do, however, the FHA amendatory clause says that the buyer is not responsible for purchasing the property for a penny more than what it appraises for. So to that end, your buyer can be confident that even if they have to bid above what the list price is, that they're still going to be protected in that because the FHA amendatory clause protects them there. Does that make sense to everybody?
Right. And I knew that, but
I don't know what's going on.
Oh, again, it happened. Yes, that I knew about that amendment.
Okay, perfect. So we're gonna go down there. So that's what we're gonna let our buyers know.
Okay. So, and I guess the reason why I was kind of asking that question is because, so are sellers listing their property, and I understand we should absolutely do our comps before we go submitting an offer, but are sellers at this time listing their properties for less than what the market shows that it is bearing?
It depends. So most sellers are listing it at value. You are going to have some outliers that some will list it above market value and some will list it below market value. That's a different strategy, however, that's on the other side, that's on your listing side, because as a listing agent, when you do list it below market value, that just means you're going to get even more competition there. So that's one of the strategies that's used in order to start a bidding war. Okay, but as it pertains to us with our buyers, we're going to advise our buyers on the market like Mr. Porter said, in that buyer consultation. We're going to advise them right away so that they know what this market entails, so that when they do come into this market, they're not surprised. Long gone, or at least for this period, these times when we were able to offer just above list price, or just, you know, offering what the buyer needs on closing costs, simply adding that to the purchase price is no longer good enough. You're going to have to go above that. So although we've added that $16,500 to the purchase price, we still need to reduce the closing concession. And that's the point that I want to make sure is very clear, because we went through the activity of adding that amount onto the purchase price, but now you've got to realize that this is something that other buyers are going to do as well. So your offer still needs to be stronger, and we're going to need to add that. My apologies, we're having some work done here, and sometimes when they're working on things, they mess with the router. So I hope that's not what's going on here, because my screen keeps trying to stop the sharing. But I'm going to continue as long as you guys are still with me. All right, so as it pertains to other negotiation features, transfer and recordation. Let's just say first with that seller concession, if you have to ask for seller concession, my recommendation is not to ask for any, to see where the buyer can get those funds from, if they can get it from a retirement account, if they can get it from a gift, if they can get a lender credit, see what the lender can do to structure it so that he's able to give them a credit, some type of down payment assistance. So it's to ask for little to no seller concessions. Now, if you do have to ask for seller concessions, then you still want to, I would not go more than 1.5% on seller concessions, and that's with going well above list price. So just know that this is what this market is showing us, and we're not excited with what we see as it pertains to our buyers, but these are the offers that are being accepted in the midst of COVID, okay? So then next, as it pertains to transfer and recordation taxes, our goal when we're writing an offer for our buyer is to get them the house that they want. They're going to be happy with you, Dee. They're going to be happy with you, Anita, when you make them a homeowner. When they come to you and say, hey, I want to buy a house, and they leave as happy homeowners, they're going to be happy as a result of that. So whether or not they had to pay a few more $1,000s to get into the house is going to all be a wash once they are a homeowner. It's not going to matter that much at all. So that being said, you want to keep them focused on the main thing, and that main thing is making them a homeowner, okay? So as it pertains to the other features, like your transfer and your recordation in there, there's a space in that offer that talks about who's going to pay the transfer and recordation. All of these are negotiation features. The standard is that we put, I'm going to stop sharing because I'm not sure what's going on here. I'm not sure if you guys can see the screen because it keeps trying to go out, and I believe it's because of the work that we're having going on over here. Sometimes they have to turn out, you know, the internet, and it affects the router. I do apologize for that. But if you guys can follow me, we're going to continue. Transfer and recordation, that's another negotiation tool.
Jazz.
So when customarily, yes.
So when we, yeah, you were just getting ready to say customarily for transfer and recordation.
Yes.
I thought that was a law. It's not a law?
Well, no, not at all. It's not a law at all. So if well, let me separate it for you. If buyers are a first-time home buyer, then there's a transfer and recordation addendum that states that a certain portion of it they don't have to pay. So they get a 50% discount on a certain portion of the transfer and recordation. Okay? Now, that being said, there's an addendum that shows who is going to pay that transfer and recordation, whether it's in part or in full. So if you're in a bidding war and your buyer is not a first-time home buyer and they're willing to pay all of their own transfer and recordation, that's simply another negotiation strategy. Now, you don't have to say that the buyer is going to pay all of it, but you need to know what your options are. You need to know that that's something that you have to utilize.
Thank you.
Okay? Does that make sense to everybody?
Yes.
Does anybody have a question about the transfer and recordation? Okay, great. So then next we'll talk about contingencies. in this market, it would behoove our buyers. We're going to have to start doing as is with inspection, because the winning offers are the ones that are doing as is with inspection and the right to terminate. Okay? So customarily, we've always included the inspection contingency that has the 4-page addenda with all the language that says that our buyer gets to negotiate and all of the above. However, with this market, we may have to start doing as is with inspection and the right to terminate. Now, that being said, if your buyer does as is with inspection and the right to terminate, that doesn't mean that you can't go back and ask for repairs. It just means that the seller does not have to do repairs. And it also means if the buyer is not happy with the results of the inspection, then the buyer can terminate the contract. So there's still protection, and that's very important on our buyer side, that we protect our buyer with putting that, having the buyer to have the right to terminate the contract in the event that they're not happy with the inspection. But our goal is to get that buyer to settlement. And in order to get them closed on their home, we've got to actually get their contract ratified. And without a ratified contract, the buyer doesn't get the home. So everything that we have to do is going to be geared towards getting their offer accepted by the seller.
So
does anybody have any questions with that?
I was going to jump in real quick, Jasmine. So guys, that with Jasmine, that strategy that Jasmine is alluding to in terms of doing an as-is addendum, and then still, you know, I ask for repairs no matter what the contract says, even if it's a bank-owned property, they say no repairs will be given. I always ask for repairs. It doesn't matter to me. I look at that like they're not talking to me. So I still ask for the repairs. So the idea is that you put that in the contract or in the offer so that you can get a ratified contract. Now, it's up to them if they're going to enforce it once you are ratified. But the idea is to get your foot in the door, to get your client a ratified contract. Once your client has a ratified contract, now you have a little bit more leverage and a little bit more momentum because they're working with you and your client only. So once you do the inspection, you can say, hey, I know we said we're going to ask for it. You know, I don't even put that in there. I don't even say, I know we said we're going to ask for it. I just send over the copy of the inspection report and the property inspection notice. Now, most of the times, any good agent on the seller side is going to say, you know, this property is as is. And I'm going to say to them, yeah, but you still need to let your client know that they're asking for these repairs anyway. Now, if they say no, they say no. Sometimes they come back and say, okay, we'll do 4, 5, and 6. At least we got something. So the whole idea at this point is to get ratified contracts. That's what your goal is. Any questions?
Very well said. Now, once you get a ratified contract, now you have two parties that are invested. So they have invested time, energy, you know, all of these things. So now they're going to be that much more determined to get this property to settle. So as Mr. Porter said with the inspections, yeah, we have an as-is addendum with the right to terminate. But if you've ever been on the listing side or a seller, you know that that seller wants that contract to go to settlement just as much as the buyer does. So that seller now has an investment in the transaction with your buyer. So you can go back and ask for those repairs because your buyer has asked you to. And if that seller says no, you move forward from there. But at the end of the day, in order to get them settled on that home, you're going to have to get their contract ratified. So just make sure that you have a conversation with the buyer in advance to say, this is what the market is doing right now. And everybody realizes that this is an excellent time to buy. So the competition in this market is stiff. Our goal is to get you the home that you desire. In order for us to do that, we're going to have some concessions. There are going to be some things that you're going to like, and there are going to be some things that you're going to have to be willing to, you know, concede in order to get into the property that you want so that you can be happy. Now, those repairs, maybe some of them. Now, that being said, if there are major repairs, that's not something that we're going to negotiate or allow our buyer to take on if by chance the foundation is not sure, the house is falling down, we terminate the contract and move on, because at the end of the day, we've got to make sure that the buyer is happy with the purchase. Otherwise, it comes back and affects them and affects us too. So we're not talking about structural things. We're not talking about anything as it pertains to safety. We're not talking about, faulty plumbing that's flooding everywhere. We're not talking about the roof is leaking everywhere. We're not talking about anything like that, but we are talking about those cosmetic things. We are talking about, hey, well, if this needs to be swapped out, it's a move-in ready house, but there's some minor repairs that need to be done. Those are things that we're talking about.
Now, guys, let's not get too hasty, broker lady, okay? So what we don't want to just say, okay, we're out of the contract. We want to let them know that those repairs that we're highlighting are probably repairs that any appraiser is going to also find. So they can fix them now, or we can wait until the appraiser goes out, and then those become what we call lender required repairs, which means in order for the lender to fund the loan and for those people to get paid, for the seller to get a check, he has to make those repairs, those structural repairs. So I don't know if Jasmine, I just want to make sure that we're not suggesting that just because the inspection itself says that these repairs, these structural repairs are imminent, that we're then walking away from the contract at that point. I think we have another contingency in place, which is the appraisal. So we rely on the appraisers to actually go out and do their jobs and to verify and validate the findings from the inspector, which doesn't really hold much weight with the seller as the appraisal itself does.
Well, thank you, Mr. Porter, because you're a step ahead of us. We were dealing with the inspection contingency, and next is the appraisal contingency. So that was very well said. Thank you for that. So as it pertains to the inspection, the goal is to make sure that your buyer is comfortable with using that as-is addendum. So you're going to have certain conversation with them in advance to get them comfortable with the market and comfortable with saying, hey, I'm going to purchase this property as is. So they'll need to know what the assurances are as it pertains to their security in light of that property, okay? So another added layer of security for the buyer is exactly what Mr. Porter just said. When you move on from the inspection contingency, now we have the appraisal contingency. In that appraisal contingency, there's something called your lender required repairs. If the appraiser cites anything, then now it becomes a required repair that the seller has to do, and the buyer doesn't have to ask for those things. Even if the seller says, hey, I'm not going to do these things, the lender will then require that the seller complete them in order to close the deal. So those are two completely separate entities in and of themselves. They are totally unrelated. The inspection is simply between the buyer and the seller. That's what the seller is willing to agree to, and it's what the buyer is requesting. The appraisal, on the other hand, is what the loan is going to require to be completed in order for the lender to fund that loan and in order for it to close. So totally separate, but they both protect the buyer, okay? So this is language that you want to make sure that you have and you understand, because you will have to coach your buyer throughout this process. And that'll just help them to feel even more confident in moving forward, because just like Mr. Porter said, you don't have to pull out because of the inspection. Although the addendum will say as is with the right to terminate, they now have the appraisal contingency to fall back on. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yes.
Any questions?
No.
Okay,
Yes,
perfect.
makes sense.
I want to make sure that, excellent. Want to make sure we all understand how to talk our buyers through it, because some are going to be very aggressive right offhand and they're going to be fine with what you're telling them. And some you're going to have to coach and counsel a little bit with giving them these assurances so that they know, hey, it's totally fine for me to change my strategy. Although I've been asking for full 3%, although I've been asking for every contingency, this is no longer the market to do that. Okay, So in addition to that, so the financing contingency, that's something that most of our buyers are not able to remove if they are getting financed for the property. Now, that being said, the period, the number of days that we're asking for, that's something that we want to make sure. I would want to share this with you guys again, but I don't know what's going on with Zoom today, so I'm going to have to share it with you the next time. But page 2 of the residential contract of sale, there are a couple of empty boxes at the top that stipulate the number of days after being ratified that buyer is going to go and actually apply for the loan. The second empty box is going to say the period of time that you're asking for your buyer to get their loan approved. That period of time is a contingency period. So I know sometimes people ask for a 30-day period. We want to reduce that to a 21-day period and simply have that conversation with the lender so that the lender can say, okay, you know, I'm able to get this loan approved in 20 days, or I'm able to get it approved in 14 days. Whatever that period is, you put that in your contract, because those are contingency periods that make your buyer's offer look stronger than the next. Okay? I say that with the caveat that just like any period in your contract, in the event that you need more time, your lender needs more time, you can simply get an extension. So if you put in a 14-day or 21-day period for the lender to approve your buyer's loan, and if that lender needs another 7 days, you simply send over an addendum. Buyer and seller agree to extend the financing contingency, you know, by 7 days or whatever it is that you need. So that is something that you'll be able to do once you get a ratified contract. But if you can't get a ratified contract, then you're not able to move to those next steps. So remember, the main goal is to get that buyer closed on the property. And in order to do that, you're going to have to write this offer so that the seller is willing to accept it. And with the fierce competition out here, we're just going to have to concede on some of those things that we normally would have made a little bit more buyer side friendly or a little bit more buyer heavy in a sense. We're going to have to come more to the middle and onto the seller side in this seller's market. Okay. Another thing is going to be our closing date. We standardly ask for a 30-day settlement, and that's a very good time frame. However, we're going to need to look at that as well to see what we can do to get our buyer's offer accepted. So if you have a conversation with Michael Cooper, or if you're working with another lender, whoever it is, Cooper, we know he can get loans closed in 25 days. We've had some of them that we've gotten closed in 21 days. I would simply say to write in your offer 25 days, because you already know what the competition is doing. The competition is asking for 30 days to close. Thank you, Mr. Porter. That's exactly what I was talking about. Go back up to paragraph 10. So this is what I was referring to, paragraph 10, that at the financing application and commitment, the first portion asks about the number of days in which the buyer is going to actually go and apply for financing. Some people, I don't understand, they put, 10 days in there, which is a ridiculous amount of time if you're supposed to be closing in 30 days. Your buyer needs to get that application done immediately after settlement, okay? And also the time from which the contract is accepted to the point when the lender has an approved loan for your buyer. This is the period that we're talking about, 21 days there. So your settlement date, ask for 25 days now on a settlement. If you need more time, simply request an extension. Now, I want to say that if ever you have to request an extension for settlement and your buyer's loan is not yet approved, you want to extend both things, your settlement date as well as your financing contingency. Both of those things are going to be important in order to secure and protect the buyer's earnest money deposit. So I'll repeat that one more time. You can ask for your settlement date now 25 days instead of the standard 30 that we've been doing to make your buyer's offer more competitive. And then also ask for no more than this 21 days for this financing commitment. And if you have to ask for more time, extend both dates. So extend the financing commitment contingency as well as the settlement date. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So
Okay.
scroll on down for me, Mr. Porter. Now, another thing that we just passed on here, inclusions and exclusions. When you're doing that, look at what the seller has already provided in those disclosures and make sure that it matches this. So if the seller has already said that they're leaving all of these things, then make sure that yours matches, because what happens oftentimes is this could cause a little bit of friction. Now, if your buyer wants that chandelier that the seller didn't include, of course, you've got to ask for it for them, but make sure that they know that that's another point of possible contention in the event that the seller did not want to leave it and they want their offer to be as competitive as possible. So let's just make sure that we're getting our buyer's foot in the door with everything that we're doing. Okay, keep scrolling down, Mr. Porter. And while he's scrolling, I want to talk about the contingency period for that, even the as-is addendum with inspection and the right to terminate. I would not ask for more than 7 days on that addendum. I get offers where people are asking for 10 days and 14 days and all of those things. Remember that the time frames that you put in this contract, these are contingency periods, which causes the seller's contract to be less secure. Because as long as there is a contingency, there's a possibility for the buyer to pull out. So an attractive offer to the seller is one that has lesser or shorter contingency periods, because then at least the seller knows that their contract is secured after that contingency expires. That's when it changes from active under contract to pending, because they're all but going to settlement. They're simply waiting on the final approval and the clear to close. All right? So those are things to consider when we're writing offers on behalf of our buyers that we want to ensure get accepted. Scroll down for us. So if the buyer is a first-time home buyer, you want to make sure that you check that box right there and include one of two things. Either in the addendum of clauses, there's a place for it that has first-time home buyer, or there's a physical first-time home buyer addendum. But one of those two things will need to be included along with it. This is the seller contribution addendum, which we used to be able to get with 3%, no longer. Keep going, Mr. Porter. Okay, now on this FHA financing addendum, this is the one that we were talking about earlier. Scroll down so we can look at that FHA amendatory clause. And then there's one more feature in here that we'll talk about. This FHA amendatory clause is what allows us to comfortably offer over list price for the property without our buyer feeling as if they're going to pay more for the property than what the property is worth. This amendatory clause protects them so that that's not something that they have to worry about. Okay. That being said, go down to the next page, because this is where our lender required repair comes in. Here we are. So paragraph number 7, where it says lender required repairs, this is where you're going to put the figure that you're asking for the seller to reserve to make repairs should the appraiser come back with any repairs that are necessary. Now, this amount is a negotiable amount. If the seller, are you guys able to see the screen? Are you able to see what Shay is sharing?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect. So this is the amount that we're talking about here for lender required repairs, where Mr. Porter was talking about if the appraiser comes back with something, don't be too hasty to pull out because of the inspection, because you have the chance to get it fixed. This is the amount that you would ask. So in the event that you go to a property and everything looks amazing, it looks like it's newly renovated, you don't have to worry about asking for $3,000 in lender required repairs. You might ask for $1,000 in lender required repairs. If you go to a property, on the other hand, and it looks like there's quite a bit of disrepair, you might ask for $2,500 in lender required repairs. Now, that being said, we still don't know what those repair costs are going to be. This is just an amount that you've asked for the seller to reserve in advance in the event that there are any required repairs by the lender. This is a negotiable amount. So just know that even with this negotiable amount, if the buyer is asking for the seller to take care of those repairs, it could be less than, it could be equal to, or it could be more than that amount. but just be prepared that whatever amount we ask for, this could be a position that they push back on. Say by chance those lender required repairs come in and the seller agrees to do them and they're like $1,800 worth of repairs, the seller could push back and say, well, because of paragraph number 7, we're only going to do $1,500 worth of the lender required repairs. At least then that won't be unfamiliar. You'll know exactly what it is that they're talking about. So just be mindful in what it is that you're asking for in lender required repairs, because those are negotiation tools as well. All right, scroll down. Now, while he's scrolling, there's one thing that I want to say that's extremely important. When you send your offers over, you want to make sure that every single thing that's supposed to be signed by your buyer and you are signed. One of the easiest ways to make sure that your contract is not accepted is to have a great offer, but an ill-prepared contract, meaning that there are a lot of signatures, dates, initials, and all of those things missing. And if that happens, then the seller's not even able to ratify your contract on the spot, even if they wanted to, because it has to go back and forth so many times that they could be missing out on another offer. So I realize we're at 1:30. I'm going to go ahead and do a soft close because I honor your time and I want you guys to be able to get back to doing whatever it is that you need to do if you have to go. Otherwise, I'll continue and we'll go ahead and adjourn in just a few minutes. Okay, so making sure that your offer is complete, meaning that every single page that's supposed to have a date, buyer's name, seller's name, property address, those are the simplest things in your offer. Those are the easiest things, but simply being diligent to look at every page and make sure that all of those things are satisfactory. That's something that's going to get your offer accepted more than an offer that comes in and now it's, you know, it's $18,000 over list price, but it's missing a lot of signatures and a lot of, you know, initials, and it doesn't have information in the proper place. Let's just take our time when we're preparing our offers and be sure that we've gone through each page, just like when you were in school and you had to turn in a term paper. You didn't just do it, rush through it really quickly and turn it in. You probably looked at that thing about 5 times or more to make sure, hey, do I have everything that I need? And everything, it's going to tell you what you need: buyer's name, seller's names, initials. Just go through every feature and make sure that everything that's supposed to be initialed by your buyer is done, because in order for your buyer to settle on that home, they got to have a ratified contract. The last thing we want to do is to have a seller to sign off on an offer and it not be fully ratified because we're missing initials and we're missing signatures, and those things just make it that much less secure for our buyers. So just be diligent, pay attention, be attentive to the documents that you're doing, and simply use the negotiation strategies that we've talked about today to make sure that your buyer's offers are accepted. All right, I'm going to stop right there so that we can have question and answer. Does anybody have any questions about anything that we've talked about thus far? If you have any questions, go ahead and unmute yourself. Does everything make sense to everybody?
Thanks, Mrs. Porter. I think I need to go to take some time and read over some of this again to see if I have additional questions. This was a good explanation for some of these documents or pieces of the contract that I have not actually had to work with before. So I want to look at them again to see where we are, to see what I understood and took in today. I think the the FHA financing document is a little. I need to look at it and get some more clarification. I think the other documents I'm much more familiar with. But thank you very much, because this was really, really clear and really good to think about how to negotiate going forward in what we see as a seller's market. Um, and I also had wanted to ask a little bit about the foreclosures, and that would be after other folks might have some other questions about what we were talking about this afternoon.
Okay. And like Dee said, for everybody, go back and take a look at your documents. But just to recap, we want to be very aggressive in writing our offers. We want to make sure that these offers are overpriced, remove the seller help, reduce the contingency period, and we'll pick up with everything else next week. Okay, guys? If you have any questions, you can unmute yourself now. Otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and release this. It's 1:35, and I want to honor your time.
Thank you.
You are very welcome. Have a great rest of the afternoon.
Okay, thanks a bunch. Shall I send that in?
You guys are welcome.
Mrs. Porter, should I send that question in like a text or an email?
Yeah, you can send it directly to me. It may be something that we can talk about as a group next week.
Okay.
But I don't want to hold people longer than
Right.
we've allotted for Realty Talk. So let me let you guys go, and you can reach out to me directly. Okay, Dee?
Text or email, or it doesn't matter?
Either way is fine.
Thank you.
All right, guys. Have a great day.
You too.
Bye-bye.
All righty. Bye-bye.